Harassment in the workplace. We're making great progress. We've covered a few different types of harassment in the workplace. But what about when harassment comes from someone who is not an employee? Or when you are present when harassment is directed to someone other than yourself? This may be considered second-hand harassment or third-party harassment. Let's do a deeper dive into each. Second-hand harassment indirectly and sometimes inadvertently affects other victims. For example, if you overhear or see obscenities directed at someone else, or are in the presence of someone downloading offensive materials which you find offensive, this is second-hand harassment. Do you remember Aurora from earlier in our training? We spoke about her. She was employed at ABC Company for 30 years. She was older than her coworkers, and she was being referred to as a grandma or an old-timer. Let's consider Paul. Paul is a coworker and is also similar in age. He realizes that the behavior is targeted at Aurora due to her age. This upsets Paul because he finds the remarks offensive, disrespectful, and rude. Although Paul is not directly being targeted, he is being subjected to the behavior. Debbie is a warehouse worker who receives all incoming freight. She has a regular transport driver named Jim that brings her materials once a week. During her initial conversations with Jim, he seems to be very friendly. However, Jim begins to make sexual innuendos towards Debbie, and the relationship becomes uncomfortable. Debbie asked him to stop the behavior. However, he continued to make suggestions that they should hook up and state that she was too pretty to work in the warehouse. His behavior affected her work environment. This is third-party harassment. Even though Jim is not an employee of the same company, his behavior directly impacts her work environment. If her employer is aware of the behavior and does not address it, the company can be held liable. The purpose of each example that we've covered today is to help you better understand how to recognize harassment in the workplace. There are many other examples of harassment. For instance, harassment can come in the form of questions, comments, or jokes about a protected class, such as age. It can include making fun of a person's attire or hairstyle based on a protected class such as religion or national origin, or sending a note or an email with jokes based on a protected class such as race or sex. There are no limits on who can be a harasser and who can be a target. Remember, the harasser is not always the opposite sex of the target. In reality, they might be the same. So who is protected from harassment in the workplace? Let's review. Employees, interns, temporary and seasonal employees, applicants, volunteers, independent contractors, and vendors. So who is liable? First, the employer. The employer is liable when the employer knew or should have known the harassment was taking place and failed to take immediate and appropriate corrective action. The manager or supervisor. If it is found that the management should have known about the harassment or perpetrated it, they may be subject to civil and criminal penalties. The harasser. Yes, the harasser can be held liable for their behavior with civil and criminal penalties. Harassment can take place outside in another location where a business function is taking place. For example, if you are traveling on business, harassment can occur during travel or in a hotel room. It can occur while in an automobile, plane, restaurant, holiday party, or any other team building event. These are just a few examples and not intended to be an exhaustive list. Knowledge check. Read the following example and answer the question below.